My best friend Abby got married this summer, and she and her new husband Kai went to Greece for their honeymoon. She wanted everything to be just perfect, so like a good Unitarian Universalist, she did her research. She read all the guidebooks and travel blogs and crowdsourced the best activities from friends and family. Where should we go, she asked. What is a must-do in Greece? Again and again she heard, go and watch the sunset over the sea in Santorini. Every guidebook, travel blog, and all her friends who had been to Greece said that it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the best, most picturesque, perfect part of their trip to Greece, not to be missed. So Abby put it at the very top of her to-do list. When they got to Greece, Abby was overwhelmed by its beauty. There were evenings by the sea, eating dinner of fresh caught fish, listening to live local music with cats curled on balconies and everyone laughing that felt like they came out of some magical storybook. It was so gorgeous she could barely stand it. So with that level of expectation as her baseline, Abby and Kai took the boat to the island of Santorini, expecting a lifetime peak experience on top of what was already breathtaking beauty. Loaded up with expectation, they headed out towards paradise. And Abby hated it. She hated everything about it. She hated their first steps off the boat into what felt like a street full of consuming tourism, with tchotchke shops lining the avenue selling memorabilia and very expensive reproductions of sunsets. She hated the overpriced, slightly less good, even seemingly less Greek food, the too polished musicians playing pop tunes, the expensive hotel room that looked like every other hotel room she's ever stayed in, except with Greek accents. Still, she readied herself for the sunset. Maybe the reason for all of this overpriced tourist trap nonsense was that sunset over the sea. Maybe she just had to find the right restaurant, the right night, the right combination of all the right things to get that peak experience she'd been expecting. So she pored over the literature again, searching for the perfect piece of fresh fish, the perfect combination of sea and dipping sun and tinkling music that would give her that little slice of heaven that everyone else had been served up in Santorini. She made her carefully researched choices, and she and Kai set out to experience perfection. And she hated it. The whole scene felt contrived, and the music was bland, and the fish was dry. And the sunset, well, the sunset was a sunset. It was fine. It was not life-changing. It was not mystical. It was not a once-in-a-lifetime experience of heaven on earth. It was a perfectly fine sunset. Everything else, though, was obviously terrible. Part of the reason Abby was so deeply disappointed with her experience of Santorini was her expectation going in that it was going to be perfect. The sunset in Santorini is truly supposed to be one of the best in the world. There are travel websites based entirely on comparing the best places in Santorini to watch the sunset, and hotels that make their livelihood off of advertising sunset views. In his 2004 book, The Paradox of Choice, Why Less is More, the psychologist Barry Schwartz argued that trying to choose the perfect thing leads to lower self-esteem, more regret, and lower satisfaction with the choice a person eventually makes. It seems that the higher our expectations are as human beings, the more likely we are to be dissatisfied. A 2014 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that the levels of people's happiness with the results of playing an experimental game were more dependent on their expectations of that game than whether they won or lost. The study included more than 18,000 participants who played the game while hooked up to an MRI machine that scanned their brains for their reactions. The correlation between what those people expected to happen and their level of happiness with the results was so strong that the research team was able to develop a mathematical equation that could accurately predict how happy a person would be with varying results. Dr. Rob Rutledge, who's the senior research associate at University College London and the leader of the study, said, "Happiness depends not on how well things are going, but whether things are going better or worse than expected." Abby's expectations of the sunset over Santorini were off the charts. Her expectations of the rest of the trip, however, the local restaurant that they happened upon while walking down the street, were more average, and she was blown away by that rest of the trip, charmed by novelty and surprise. Lower expectations, however, have their own consequences. There's a classic 1963 psychological study by Rosenthal and Fody that measured the effects of expectation. In that first study, the researchers gave undergraduate experimenters lab rats and told them to train the lab rats to run through a maze. The researchers gave one set of undergraduates a group of rats and told them that that group of rats was especially bright. And then they gave the other group of undergraduates an especially dull set of rats. They told both sets of undergraduates that they would have a week to train their rats to run through the maze, and at the end of the week, the group of especially bright rats ran through the maze significantly more quickly than the entire set of especially dull rats. The bright rats had improved with every day of the week of training, while the dull rats showed little to no improvement over the course of the week. Of course, all of the rats were just standard lab rats. None of them was particularly bright or dull. The scientists had simply assigned them those terms at random. It was the undergraduates' expectations of the rats that made the difference in the rats' maze-running capacity. This kind of effect, where expectations have concrete effects on behavior, has since been labeled the Rosenthal effect. Later that same year, Rosenthal developed another experiment to test how teachers' expectations of students might affect student outcomes. In that experiment, the scientists assigned a completely random list of students a label of ready to bloom and told their teachers at the beginning of the year that those students were likely to enter a year of high academic achievement. They gave all the children in the class an IQ test at the beginning and at the end of the year. And when they tested the students again at the end of the year, the random, ready-to-bloom student list had significantly more improved IQs at the end of the school year than the students that were not on that list. The teachers' expectations had effect on the students' improvement. So, while lower expectations will lead to more happiness and probably compassion, higher expectations will likely lead to more improvement. We're left in a competition between different values. Episcopal priest and faculty member at the Living School, Reverend Cynthia Burgo, recommends the third way, which she describes as, quote, the interplay of two polarities calling forth a third, which is the mediating or reconciling principle between them. In contrast to a binary system which finds stability in the balance of opposites, a ternary system stipulates that there's a third force that emerges as a necessary mediation of these opposites, and that in turn generates a synthesis at a whole new level. It's a dialectic whose resolution simultaneously creates a new realm of possibility. According to Bourgeot, the third way is not quite the triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, because the third force is always an equal player and not just a combination of the first two oppositional energies. That third player is creative. It makes something new. When I look at the dialectic conversation between high and low expectations, I see the third way as being open to hope. Rather than abandoning all planning, heaven forbid, or having very low expectations, one might do some research and work and planning and then also leave open space for flow and change and surprise. In the book Messy, The Power of Disorder to Transform Our Lives, Tim Harford tells the story of David Bowie's musical recreation. In 1976, David Bowie was struggling with an identity crisis, addiction, and writer's block. He moved to Berlin with Iggy Pop and invited a number of different musicians and producers to come out and work with him to make a new sound. One of the people that he invited was a keyboard player named Brian Eno. And Eno brought with him a deck of cards that he called oblique strategies. Anytime that the team got stuck, Eno would draw a card from the deck at random and then tell the team to follow its extremely weird instructions. One of the instructions was, be the first not to do what has never been done before. Other cards included instructions like twist the spine, emphasize the flaws, and change instrument roles. This last instruction resulted in one track on which the world-renowned guitarist Carlos Alomar was told to play the drums. Predictably, the musicians hated it. The violinist from Simon House said that their recording sessions often sounded absolutely terrible. And yet, they created some of the most critically acclaimed albums of the 1970s. Bowie's Low and Heroes, and Iggy Pop's The Idiot and Lust for Life. It was the combination of mastery and novelty, long work and sudden, even weird surprise that made the new sound. Rather than these things being in dialectical opposition, the forces were able to create something new together, something beautiful. The complexity of expectation is that it will affect our experience and the experience of the people around us. To blend the improvements of high expectations with the happiness of low expectations, we might shift to open expectations, a more complex sense of expectancy. Something like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I'm open to wonder and awe and beauty. And I hope to be moved and transformed for the better. The third way comes from more than just a synthesis of two opposing forces. It comes from a third element as well. In addition to the power of planning and the openness of hope, we might choose to add deliberate gratitude. This morning, while I was preparing for this service, I watched the sunrise over our lake. It was an everyday affair, not once in a lifetime, but a shadow mist of pink that passed from the south corner of my window, wandering through pale periwinkle clouds to blush into the north. It was speckled with wisps of white, and then it slowly faded into rolling lavender. And in my state of planning, I witnessed the surprise and the wonder of unfolding life, and I was extremely grateful to be alive this morning. We don't know what will happen, and it is wise to plan and work towards the things that we desire, and yet too concrete expectations will only leave us frustrated and disappointed. When we combine planning and research with an openness to the creativity of life around us, an openness to the surprises, the unexpected beauty and newness that we never could have planned ourselves, then we get to experience that fresh dinner by the sea, and David Bowie's Low, and the surprise beauty that is life breathing on us. When those surprises come, we might mix in our third practice of gratitude for all that is our life. May it be so.